Okay, folks, let's get on the way so that we can get the full benefit of the time that we have. I wanted to tell you what we're going to do today so that you can see how we are moving along to achieve it. Having spent much of last time going over with you Marx's commitment to focus on class analysis, and having stressed that by class Marx meant something unique and different, namely the production and distribution of surplus, and how that happens in societies, and how it shapes what goes on in a society, and how Marx is going to focus us on it because he thinks other people have neglected, missed, or ignored, or downplayed this phenomenon. In other words, Marx saw his work as contributing to the general understanding, not just of people in general, although he was happy to do that, but he was particularly interested in contributing to the overthrow of capitalism since he didn't like it. And he felt that previous revolutionaries, by the way, I'm stressing this because a couple of you communicated to me, which I'm appreciative of, and so I want to respond to what you asked. Marx was concerned that previous efforts to bring about liberty, equality, and fraternity, if you recall the great ideals of the French Revolution, hadn't succeeded. Marx was by no means of the opinion that he was the first radical on the planet, hardly. He knew of many, many others, past and present, around him, and he felt that he wanted to contribute something that would make the next revolutionary upsurge more successful in bringing about the goals of revolutionaries like liberty, equality, fraternity than had been the case before. And so he felt that this understanding of the organization of surplus, that every social system has a particular way of producing and distributing surplus, was precisely something that previous revolutionaries had not understood, had not therefore focused on, and had not therefore developed a program for. And that failure undermined all of their other efforts, many of which were interesting and successful. So for example, hopes for the ending of poverty, or hopes for an egalitarian society, or hopes for democracy had come to naught because, in part, the revolutionaries who struggled for those things had not understood that every society functions the way it does, in part because of how it organizes the surplus. They hadn't attended to that question, they hadn't understood it, and so their programs for change ignored it, didn't worry about the problem of reorganizing the surplus, and therefore often didn't. So that the organization of the surplus before and after the revolution were the same, and so it undermined those revolutionary changes that were achieved. And so Marx's idea was Marx, could contribute by really getting people to understand this issue of the organization of surplus. How in every society, some people are designated to produce a surplus, other people get it, and they in turn distribute it to yet other people, and how that's all worked out is a crucial part of how a society works, how a society evolves, and what its qualities are. So it's not a focus on class because it's more important than other parts of society. It isn't. It's a focus on class because it is a neglected element. It has been missed, and the social costs of not understanding it, especially for revolutionaries, has been awful. And so Marx focuses on it. The phrase, therefore, that opens the Communist Manifesto, the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle, is followed by remarks that clearly show Marx meant to say, and he pretty well said it, that this is the hidden history of society. It's the part of society that is occluded, that we don't see, that hasn't been understood, and therefore he is going to focus on it. Okay? So that was a general project. And it's that general project that lies behind Marx's effort to locate and identify in the contemporary society he lived in, capitalism, 19th century, mid-19th sense, to make his work show people that this capitalism has right at its core the production and distribution of the surplus, that it works in a very particular way and has enormous social consequences that any revolutionary must understand, because any successful revolution requires to transform it. If you're going to go from a non-democratic to a democratic system, from an unequal to an egalitarian system, then part of the job is to transform the class structure. And he's going to make that case after he shows us how capitalism is in fact a system with a very particular production and distribution of surplus systems in it. Capital is the book, the work, where he does this. Much of his earlier writing, some of you know some of the names, the Grundrisse, the theory of capital, the reproduction of capital, wage, labor, and capital, value, price, and profit, very famous pamphlets that he wrote. Most of those are preliminary sketches, like a painter might make of different parts of what will eventually be one major canvas. That canvas is Marx's Capital. And just a word for those of you that are interested, Marx was a highly skilled writer. He had been a philosopher, he was a practiced journalist who did an enormous amount of writing. He was very clever, very schooled in the arts and the sciences. So when he finally came to write Capital, it is the work of a very mature, skilled, multi-talented writer. I tell you this because I would urge you, as a piece of literature, read it. You will enjoy it. You will find, by the way, for those of you interested in economics, very few parallels in the history of economics. For example, a writer who, in the middle of an explanation of a complicated economic point, quotes Dante's Inferno or Greek playwrights, and he does it all the time. And it's full of humor. Now, Marx only wrote volume 1. Volumes 2 and 3, although they have his name on it, weren't written by him. That is, bits and pieces were, but putting it together was done after Marx died. That's why he couldn't write it. So his colleague, Friedrich Engels, basically put together volume 2, and the student of Marx and Engels, a German Marxist named Karl Kautsky, put together volume 3. Now, they put together based on Marx's voluminous notebooks. He wrote a great deal, but it really wasn't a finished piece of writing the way volume 1 was, which if you read them, you will see. But read volume 1. What we do today is all about what's going on in volume 1, so it's the relevant thing. If you want a shortened version, the early chapters, as I believe I mentioned to you last time, of Paul Sweezy's The Theory of Capitalist Development, will give you this. If you're interested in an even shorter and condensed version, there is a textbook in economics of which I'm one of the co-authors, and my frequent colleague Steve Resnick is another one. It's called Economics, Marxian versus Neoclassical. It's the only textbook in the profession that systematically compares Marxian economics to bourgeois economics. We wrote the book 25 years ago, 1987, 22 years ago. It was published by the Johns Hopkins University Press, and wonder of wonders, for a textbook, it is still in print. It's never gone out of print, and the reason it's in print, it's the only book that does this. So any professor who wants to give his students a comparative sense of how conventional economics is different from Marxian, this is the only book. It also contains in the middle a chapter that goes through the basics of Marxian theory, and you can use that if you want a kind of quickie way to get in to this material. Okay, so we're going to begin, as Marx does in Capital Volume 1, to analyze capitalism with the goal of showing that it's all about, that is capitalism is, it's all about the production and distribution of surplus. And what I mean by that is that that's a core part of the story. And Marx shows that in a way that no one else had done it before. Well, they didn't have his goal, so of course they didn't do it. It's not that they were limited or didn't see, but they had a different objective when they analyzed the system than Marx. Marx was to be critical, to overthrow it, and then that last thing I told you, to remedy this defect in other understandings that they didn't get at this particular question. So how then does Marx do the job? He begins by talking about commodities. It's literally how the first chapter of Volume 1 of Capital begins. It's about commodities. So we have to, because I want you all to understand what's going on here, we have to ask the question, why did he start there? Especially having just told you last time and this time that he wants to get at this business of surplus. Why is he talking about commodities? Very interesting. And the answer I would give you, not all Marxists agree, but the answer I would give you is this. At the time Marx wrote, that was the way everybody began a book about economics. It was as if everybody believed, as self-evident and obvious, that the place you begin with a book about economics is about markets where commodities are exchanged by people. And so Marx made the decision, which all writers, particularly writers who want to write against a dominant tradition, they always have a problem. You want the people who are used to thinking of the topic in a particular way to stay with you long enough to maybe be persuaded to think in a different way. But if you hit it right in the face at the beginning with a completely different way, you may very well lose them. This will look bizarre, strange, weird, and so Marx made a decision. I'm not sure it's the right one. And by the way, if you ever read his correspondence, you will see an immense exchange between Engels and himself about how they're writing, how Marx is writing Volume 1, and his anxieties about doing it the way he did it. Anyway, he decided to, if you like, pander to his presumed audience. Remember, in mid-19th century, we're talking about European societies in which the majority of people were not literate. So when you write a book in the middle of the 19th century, you're writing for a very limited audience. He's writing a 3-volume work in economics. You can imagine how big an audience he's likely to get. So he's writing for a well-educated audience, one that's used to reading and used to reading in economics. So he begins with commodities, because that's what everybody talks about. Goods and services that have a price attached to them because they are exchanged in a market. But Marx is a clever philosopher who's writing economics. So he wants to make this commodity, in the language that Bertolt Brecht, after whom this building is named, used to love to do in his plays. He developed a theory of playwriting that said that one of the ways you draw an audience in and make the play an exciting moment for them is, and he used a very important word in Marxian theory, estrangement. You draw them into something that they think is familiar, and then you make it strange. So they begin to realize that because something is familiar doesn't mean it has to be that way. It can be other, it can be different. So I want to do that with you now a little bit with commodities. What is a commodity? Very simple. And by the way, this definition applies not just to Marx, but to others as well, non-Marxists. A commodity is an object that has 2 key qualities. It's produced by human labor, as are all products in human history. But the commodity has a second quality. It goes from the producer to the consumer